Hello and welcome to a bit of a weird special side episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I'm Skylar.
And I'm a complicated mess of like three people.
And today we are discussing literally not even a single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. Instead, we are talking about Children of Earth, the 2009 limited run third season of Torchwood that was essentially a little mini event television thing. So little backstory, I guess. After series 2, BBC promoted the show, so it started on BBC 3, and it was obviously like super low budget, pretty much just kind of like, hey, just do a weird spin-off, I guess. Okay, RTD, you can do your weird spin-off because you're giving us really good ratings. Then despite the first season being kind of bad, it did well enough that they kicked it to BBC 2 and put series 2 in HD. And then after that was a much better season. They kicked it upstairs again to BBC 1, but they cut the run order to only 5 episodes, which, from what I can tell, like people like John Barrowman basically said like it felt like a punishment. It definitely seems like a lot of people felt like, okay, this is the writing on the wall. Like they also moved it to like the middle of the summer, which was like a graveyard shit like slot apparently. So I guess RTD was just like, fuck it, let's go out with a bang. And basically made event television like this. They aired, it wasn't like 5 episodes like one a week. It was 5 episodes, one every day, each day for a week.
Damn.
Interesting.
And you
like-
definitely get that vibe.
Yeah.
Just like
No, like the way that well, I don't know what you guys did, but the way that I watched it this week was the way it was aired, an episode a day over a week.
Yeah, I did that too. It's kind of a shame that you say that. Like, definitely that you could write 1,000 shallow think pieces about how Game of Thrones has like changed the scape of television, but I think it's sad that like event television like that is like I would say like more common and more respected in a way to have a shorter season with like that.
Also, this is just better than Game of Thrones.
Well, no, yeah, definitely. That's a whole other podcast. I won't get into that, but it's a lot of this felt like I didn't like love what I saw for this season or this mini series or whatever the fuck, but I feel like there are elements that would be more appreciated now if it came out, and probably given more time if a project like this was undertaken now.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing, more importantly, is that there is sort of another thing that's sort of more relevant now, and I think a lot of that is because a lot of the imagery and political scheming that goes on in this feels just as relevant, if not more relevant, an entire decade later.
yeah. Like the prime minister character, I can't remember his name,
Brian
but
Green.
yeah.
Which
You know,
I just like to say by association, because Ten deposed Harriet Jones, who led to Harold Saxon, whose death led to Brian Green, means that Ten is indirectly responsible for some of this shit.
Well, if you think about it, Ten is basically responsible for the entirety of British politics in this era.
Yeah, exactly.
He has been the man behind like the last 3 prime minister changes.
I'm not gonna say that Harriet Jones wouldn't do something heinous, but I don't think Harriet Jones would have done this, because like that's actually a case where being a conservative, like, well, I don't think she was really a conservative, because again, when she first shows up in Aliens of London, she's pretty clearly supposed to be a labor member.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But like it's definitely a case where like she would definitely try, like, even with like she wouldn't, well, first of all, she wouldn't destroy Torchwood proper. She wouldn't destroy Torchwood 3. And even if Torchwood 1 had fallen, she probably would have developed another contingency plan and been in contact with Unit more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, I just have to wonder what party was Saxon in? Did he somehow
He
like
is
move on?
absolutely have you seen him? He is absolutely a Tony Blair parody. I mean, it kind of says, I believe he's supposed to be like independent, but it is pretty clear that he's supposed to be like a New Labor type parody.
Okay, okay.
Like remember the lines where they're like, well, we don't really know why we voted for him. He just sounded good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I get that vibe now. So like, God, okay. Yeah.
This is gonna be a weird compliment and like a weird comment, but I think I think this storyline being Torchwood both helps it and holds it back, because in the previous two seasons there's like obviously like darker like imagery and darker politics, and kind of it's more grounded and gritty for both good and for bad, but I could still like believe this is in the Doctor Who universe. With some of the machinations that go on with here, I'm just like, this does not feel like if 10 suddenly showed up in the TARDIS, I'd be like, what the fuck is this doing here? Like, it would just feel
Yeah.
like
No,
totally
I
out of
have,
place.
like, some people have made the comment of like it doesn't make sense why the Doctor isn't there, but I actually have several explanations that I think are satisfactory enough. One of which is even given in the story itself of why the Doctor is not there. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I guess I don't know how much we're going to do like this in order because there is 5 episodes to talk about. But I was going to say like the first episode in particular. Now, the other thing is I had watched most, like, generally when we talk about stuff on the show, it is stuff that I have seen before. It may have been a while, but with the exception of From Out of the Rain, which was a weird fever dream, like unfinished episode, and Adrift, which obviously was a masterpiece. Those are the only two pieces of like Hooniverse material that we have covered for the show that I have not already seen.
Yeah. I hadn't I hadn't seen most of Torchwood. Definitely like nothing of like season 3 or season 4, outside of like wiki knowledge basically.
Yeah.
And I have
Um
to say there are some parts where I liked it more, like knowing just the encyclopedic, like reading it as if it was like a textbook as opposed to like actually seeing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll get to that. We can go through it roughly in order.
yeah. No, what I was going to yeah, so what I was going to say is, having not seen this, and like I had the wiki knowledge of like, so I know that Ianto dies. I know that I think I knew that Jack's, I can't remember if I knew if Jack's grandson died or not, but I sort of, knowing some of those big plot beats. I, however, didn't know a lot of it. I didn't really know much about Frobisher other than like RTD and Moffat both said something of like he's the end of Caecilius's bloodline or whatever. Like I didn't know specifics for a lot of this stuff. And sort of the thing that like struck me in this first episode is how much like it sets up so much as like business as usual, and then brutally, like, for example, the character of Rupesh, I legitimately did not see the fact that he was like a like secret government double agent who had been trying to infiltrate Torchwood coming at all.
Oh, absolutely. That it felt like just like a you know, you're in a new season, like, oh, maybe, you know, they're
Yeah,
adding
like,
a new
oh, well,
character to, like,
also knowing that Mickey and Martha were supposed to be in the episode, and obviously because they cut the episode, we're supposed to be in the season, and because they cut the season order of episodes, they were not able to get either of them back because they both obviously for good reasons signed on to shows with more episodes in them so they could get paid more because they still weren't big actors. So it's sort of like, oh, okay, is this supposed to be like a weird, like, sort of hybrid Mickey Martha character? No. He's a fake out who dies in the first episode.
yeah, it's really compelling because they set him up in such a natural way
Yeah.
of just
And he
like, oh
has
yeah,
one of the best scenes in the episode too, where he's talking to Gwen about the patient of his that committed suicide.
yeah,
Like,
and
that's a
they
really good
mislead the
scene.
yeah, they mislead the audience perfectly too, with just like they play him completely straight, just like, you know,
Yeah.
they don't give any hints. He's just like, he's just a guy in the hospital, and he's like, yo, what the fuck is going on with the alien
Yeah.
thingies, dude? But then in retrospect, it makes kind of sense because like, who the fuck sees alien shit and is just like rolls with it, starts rolling with it, you know?
Yeah.
And so in retrospect, it's something that makes sense that like, huh, you know, that I can kind of see how he seemed to have been maybe a bit clued into what was going on. But in the moment, you don't pick up on that at all, and that's what makes it a great sort of twist because it retroactively
Mhm.
makes sense, but it's not something you would notice as you're watching.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We are also in this episode introduced to the supporting cast, and I have to say this is probably like the acting in this miniseries is genuinely like firing on all cylinders, and not even like the main cast, but like all the sort of like secondary cast is great as well. But I was going to say we are introduced to Lois, who I think Lois is a bit of an underutilized character, and it's pretty clear that she is supposed to be the Martha.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he works in the government, like, resourceful, smart person of color. It is pretty clear that this is supposed to be the Martha character. But yeah. And we are also, more importantly, introduced to John Frobisher, played by the amazing, the indomitable, the wonderful Peter Capaldi, who
Wonder when
I
we'll see him again.
yeah. And it's interesting because considering the role that he is playing as Frobisher and the timeline of stuff, it is almost certain that they hired Peter Capaldi because of In the Thick of It, and yet he is playing a completely different character to Malcolm Tucker.
Oh yeah.
Like he is a like government service person, but he's not a spin doctor. He is the person who Malcolm Tucker would be yelling at. And it's really, it is a testament both to how strong RTD's character writing is and to how really astonishingly amazingly good of an actor Peter Capaldi is, that despite him, like, while he gets clearly shunted and is basically told by his people to do things, it's still a Nuremberg defense is not a defense. Just because he was following orders, he still did heinous shit, but he is still a sympathetic character despite that.
Yeah. It's with a character like that, you run a a big risk of being like a character that it's like, oh, I want this character off my screen. Like
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
stand them. And granted,
And
there's some Peter Capaldi
unlike the
bias,
prime
but
minister
still.
and some of the other cabinet members, where it is pretty clear that you are clearly supposed to be like, yes, these people are politician scum who only care about the spin and trying to like cover their own ass as much as possible. Like, it's pretty clear, like, oh, okay, you are not supposed to feel any sympathy for these people. You do feel sympathy for John Frobisher.
Yeah, I have to wonder. This is kind of like going way off into like larger meta stuff that, like, at one point Stephen Moffat supposedly said that, like, not only does 12 not only does his face tie into um Caecilius, but it also ties into Frobisher, and obviously they didn't do
Yeah.
that. But finally watching this, like, and not just reading about it, I
Yeah.
kind of was wondering, like, okay, but how? Like,
Yeah, it's I don't think 12 ever really knew well, I don't know if the Doctor knew about Frobisher, but my thing is that it is mainly the Caecilius thing, and then the Frobisher thing is just as RTD said, and literally says even in like the bonus features for Children of Earth, that Frobisher is time catching up to Caecilius's family. It
right,
is
so
that
kind of
that
like,
that cosmic debt being repaid.
okay, that's interesting. Um, yeah.
Um but yeah, also I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but while I'm thinking about the cabinet, um the guy who is the most adamant about like spin to the prime minister, and the one who's talking about, well, like, hey, getting a net reduction in the population is probably a good thing, is played by Nicholas Briggs.
It's a nice
That
wink
is literally,
at the
yeah,
camera.
it's like the only time in the televised universe that Nick Briggs has played like an actual like human character on screen, instead of just being like the voice of the Daleks and the Cybermen.
Damn.
it's it's kind of like when you see fucking what's his name, Andy Serkis in Black Panther
Oh yeah, yeah,
as like someone not in a mocap suit, and it's like, hey, you're pretty
yeah,
good for you.
yeah. Oh, and the other thing again, we're disorganized as fuck like always, but the other thing about Capaldi is that Capaldi is the perfect choice for all of the scenes where it is him talking to the 456, because he is half of what sells that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He just is so good at that sort of guy in charge of the room kind of vibe. It's
Even
like,
though he's not in charge at all, and it is
exactly.
him realizing how badly not in charge he is, and like you
Exactly.
can feel, like, obviously everyone else in the room, but you can especially feel his fear.
Yeah. And he has that sort of vibe of somebody who's like way over their pay grade but
Yeah,
really competent at their job.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is an extremely competent person, but he's just way out of his league right now.
yeah.
And that
Also,
comes across in
mhm,
everything, all of his interactions
yeah.
with the 456.
But yeah. Also, I guess so. Obviously, we have the big surprise ending where it's like, oh my god, like the episode literally ends with them like blowing up the hub and blowing up Jack, and basically the idea that the entirety of the British government is now against Torchwood because they are trying to cover their ass. Um, which obviously is this sort of great, like, effective cliffhanger. We also learn that Gwen is pregnant, which is like, it's not really like that much of a plot element, but it makes sense why it is there thematically,
Mm-hmm.
given like that the series is all about children. Um, so moving, I guess moving into episode 2, because I think those were like really. Oh wait! No, there was one more thing about episode 1. Episode 1 bursts out the gate with, like, you can tell that RTD has actually, like, for the first time since the very first episode, started writing for Torchwood again, because the character scenes are infinitely better.
Oh,
Like, you
yeah.
have the Rupesh thing, which I mentioned. You have one of the best scenes in the entirety of the show, which is Jack and Ianto finally fucking talking about their relationship.
Yeah. It feels eventful, like how you were kind of talking, like event television, without, like, at
Yeah.
least in this episode, like, coming off as like too self-important, or like, hey, we're doing a thing. It felt really natural and organic. Especially starting off as business as usual helps that, and then
Yeah.
just the amount of moving parts and players and into the narrative. Yeah, it's a really effective opener, and even though like some
Yeah.
of the stuff later down the road doesn't hit for me, the fact that they were able to like get me to buy in to something that's like this, yeah, good
Yeah.
stuff.
Um. Uh, yeah. Also, I think are we introduced? We're introduced to Clem in this episode, right?
Yeah.
He's a pretty good character. I feel like someone like that, who is clearly like someone who is has mental health issues and is disabled, could have been treated a lot worse than Clem was. And how not only is he like, I expected him to be like a bit character, but he actually is a significant major character up into the point where they kill him in episode 4. Like, I did not expect him to have as big of a role as he had. Moving on to episode 2, this starts what I would like to call sort of a recurring theme that I noticed in the first half or so of the limited series, which is the theme of the unstoppable force that is the British surveillance state coming up against the immovable object that is Wales.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
There just there's a very good underlying narrative of class conflict
Yeah,
in
that
these
too.
episodes.
Based class
Like,
solidarity, man, RTD.
no, like legitimately there's a major narrative here about like English aristocrats coming down on like Welsh working class
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
which is obviously a major thing in sort of British society. It's like that sort of continued domination of the non-English territories of the United Kingdom.
Oh man, I completely forgot to mention in the first episode too. Ianto's family. Also a case of like, I expected them to be a significantly like I expected them to not be as major a character like force as they were.
Oh, absolutely.
And
you kind
also
of
the
think...
scene where Ianto is talking to his sister about his relationship with Jack is really great and really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sort of when they're introduced, you sort of expect them to be like maybe just a bit of character background for Ianto like going into the story, but then like they just keep coming back, and by the end you're like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
You know, they become really important characters in their own right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. But like it's the scene I'm pretty sure it's in episode 2 and not episode 3. The scene where to make sure that his sister can get out and bring the laptop to Ianto, the scene where his like brother-in-law like rounds up all the neighborhood like unemployed dads, and they go and harass the like people, the government agents fucking like tailing their house is great.
That was good. This, and again, giving props where it's due, the miniseries really takes advantage and knows how to implement like a true ensemble cast with very few exceptions. Like people who you are introduced to who have names, like they stick around and or die, but they stick around.
Also, shout out to the fact that Gwen gets like 95% of the action sequences in like the first half of the show, which is actually most of the action sequences.
Yeah,
because a lot of the action is in like episodes 2 and 3.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first episode just generally does a very good job at introducing all of these characters that end up being very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it introduces sort of all the government people. It introduces Yanto's family and Jack's family, and like the all the like police people
Oh
and
yeah.
stuff hunting them down.
Even if I think out of all the the secondary sort of characters that are still obviously like important, I think the weakest link there probably is Jack's family.
Yeah.
Although his
They-
daughter is a good and interesting character, yeah, but like it is definitely like it's a weaker link compared to Reese, compared to like PC Andy, compared to Ianto's family, compared to like Frobisher and like all the government people, yeah.
Yeah.
And we also sort of get into the thing now of once actually I can't remember if it's in episode like 2 or in episode 3, the part where they start to like Unit comes over and is like, yo, hey bro, what the fuck? And there's sort of like this continuous sense of like we like trying to cover their own ass from the fact that they already gave the 4, 5, 6 kids, which I guess getting ahead of ourselves, but that's a very interesting like plot point, and obviously like it's supposed to be like a gut punch that it is Jack, but it makes perfect sense that Jack went along with it because Jack is a big picture kind of person, and considering how little that he knew at the time, it absolutely makes sense that he would make the trade of 12 kids for that he didn't know where they were going or what was going to happen to them, for this antidote to a virus that could kill like millions, which, who boy, that part is yikes, considering recent events. Oops.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, that made sense. If it, especially for like past Jack, but yeah, that one of the things that like, and this is like just a minor thing of mine, but like we see in Doctor Who, especially in this era, that like Unit is borderline like its own like military surveillance
well, yeah, because
force.
it is the United Nations, not any one country.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just like, how does Unit not know like more about this than they do? Was kind of my whole thing.
I think the idea is because Torchwood, which has already, like, I'm gonna be real with y'all. Torchwood is an imperialist force of the British Empire.
Oh, absolutely.
Up until after the fall of Canary Wharf, at which point it just kind of becomes Jack's bisexual alien hunting gang. It is steeped in imperialism. So the idea is that the government of Britain and the imperial sort of imperial interests of the British Empire did this separate from Unit, because obviously Unit is not like there is separation between the government of Britain and YouTube and Unit
and YouTube. Yeah. No, I get that. And it wasn't just like, oh, plot hole, you know, episode debunked or anything dumb like that. It was just kind of oh, okay. And it is definitely like a more grounded look at like how this type of thing would interact, whereas in Doctor Who proper, Unit is kind of whatever the fuck the script needs Unit to be at a given point.
Yeah, in classic, they're Dad's Army. In RTD era Who, they are a critique on the War on Terror. In Moffat era Who, they are basically more government-aligned, less chaotic Torchwood.
Yeah. So
and in Chibnall era, they're non-existent.
It's a whole thing. We don't. That'll be a whole thing. Take a drink, Chibnall.
Yeah. You know who didn't write for this series at all?
Moffat.
Well, that too, but also Chibnall.
Yeah. Yeah. Is the Jack? I forget because it like all blurred together for me because I watched these like one after another. Is the Jack?
Oof.
Yeah, I know.
So
Is the
why
Jack
did
reveal
you do that, man?
because I make poor life decisions. But is the Jack
The
being the
Jack
person
reveal
who
is at
does
the
it?
end of episode 3.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I was
thought
getting
it was,
ahead of myself slightly.
Yeah, it felt like, looking at the narrative structure and everything, it feels like not exactly like a climactic moment, but like that's where you would put that.
Yeah, that's where you would put
point.
that reveal, yeah.
Yeah, another thing we can talk about, and this will probably like be like more towards the ending this comes up, but like the more I kept watching this, the major critique I had was like, okay, what's the point of like where this is bringing Jack as a character? Because my whole thing about like the first two series of Torchwood was like, okay, this is a Jack who's been like broken by what Rose did to him, essentially, and this is kind of him,
and all the years of other like Torchwood like shit.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like, he still has to deal with it, but he's growing along the way, and this is kind of just like, okay, let's break Jack all over again, but like for a different reason.
It
and
is
especially
like hard, like smashing him into a wall repeatedly, basically.
Sure,
Chokes,
yeah.
like fucking like power bombing him off the top of like a Hell in the Cell.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, just fucking him up.
So
not to mention just like all the times he's fucking died by this point.
Yeah.
Like,
in this
man.
special alone.
Yeah.
He dies like 4 or 5 times.
Blown up, physically reconstituted, for part of which he was conscious and screaming. Buried in cement and probably died and revived multiple times and suffocated to death every time. The poison virus, getting shot a couple of times.
Yeah, so yeah, that was just a whole thing of like at the end, because when we were going through Torchwood, I was like, okay, I could buy seeing the Jack we see in Fugitive, being like, I could buy that.
At this point, you can't.
Yeah, no, it's just like, okay,
can't.
It has to have been a while,
and
like through no fault of RTD, at least at this point in time, it's just that character hasn't swung back, and I just think, you know, I get why in an event like this you would want to like break Jack down and like possibly
really
end the series and the Torchwood like property while you're at it. I can see why you'd want to do that, but like in a long running thing like this, it basically like shot any future creative in the foot who would want to bring back the Doctor Who Jack.
Well, I mean, RTD does it in End of Time. I watched that episode yesterday. He's in a fucking Mos Eisley Cantina ripoff drinking, and Ten basically just hooks him up with Midshipman Frame from Voyage of the Damned. And like, I watched that yesterday, and I'm like, why is Jack just not like, oh, gee, thanks, asshole?
Yeah. Fuck. Like that just occurred. Like, Jack should be fucking pissed. Like, where the fuck were you?
Yeah. Is End of Time... So End of Time is obviously after Children of Earth. When does Miracle Day happen?
2011. And it is almost assuredly not canon because it cannot canonically it does not make sense to canonically exist with like the rest of it. Like it cannot coexist with Moffat, basically. They both did different things.
That's fair, because Miracle Day, I've read up on that, and that's one of the ones where I've been like, okay, there's definitely no way the Doctor wouldn't show up for this.
Yeah.
Like, even by accident. Are you fucking kidding me? But
it canonically cannot coexist at all.
But yeah, like, Jack is just one of the weird examples of, like, with the Doctor, you can have that character change over time, because that's, you know, you literally get different actors, you literally get different writing staff, you get different arcs, you can, like, it's part of the DNA of the show that works, but for a character like Jack, it's just, like, I don't know, like John Barrowman is cool. I'll probably like enjoy him somewhat on like the New Year's special, but
Yeah.
it's just like this should stick with Jack for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of feeling like it doesn't, or if it has,
Yeah.
it's been a long ass time.
Yeah. Or maybe, who knows? Maybe because he's an immortal and he's already had so much stuff happen to him, maybe he found a way to cope. I don't know, but it's hard to believe, definitely. Bleh. So PC Andy stuff, government stuff. Obviously, Brian Greene being like, again, like he's like, it's weird to like praise the fact that like, yeah, he's a really fucking like good actor, because you fucking despise him.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
you can just see the buildup over hours and hours of him just setting Frobisher up to take the fall constantly. And
Setting
it is
everyone
like
up to take the fall.
But Frobisher especially.
Frobisher especially, yeah.
And like, it is like watching a train crash in slow motion. It is nuts. Oh yeah, oh yeah, okay.
I was just gonna say, just the extent to which he commits to being the sleaziest scumbag possible, and there's that line early on of like, he didn't become prime minister by accident, and that just it's so telling of like, yeah, to reach this level of power, this is what you have to do. You have to never be the guy that takes the fall.
Yeah. Or only like run like full damage control on and everything, basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so like oh yeah, so shout outs to the part where Ianto breaks Jack out of prison, which is literally a solid block of concrete, by just ripping the fucking thing out with a forklift. Like, it's like, I did not see that go, like, the end of that episode going that way, but sure, okay. Also, shout outs to just literally John Barrowman's ass. Just like, they just went there and showed it off on TV. It's just like, okay,
Making the best of that slot.
That's
of that
John
HD
Barrowman's ass.
quality.
Yeah. Honestly, not that great an ass. I hate to be that person, but
it's not America's ass.
no, definitely not.
It's not America's ass.
Well, no, because he's Scottish.
Is he?
Like, yeah, no, he was Scottish, and then he moved to like America. He's fucking Scottish, dude.
Catfishing all of us, damn.
Yeah.
Why doesn't he have the accent then?
Because he, like, I think it was like he moved to America and like he got picked on for it, so he just learned, like, it's why his accent is like the most flat, like mid-Atlantic USA fucking accent imaginable.
That
he's
makes
fucking
sense.
Scottish.
Okay, now that I think about it, he does actually have a very slight slant in the way he talks. Like, it's not something I notice, like, without knowing, but now that I know that, I can hear it a bit.
Yeah.
Like,
don't try fooling me, John Barrowman, you playing American
like
billionaire Malcolm
he
Merlin.
sort of, he swallows his end syllables a bit, which is a Scottish accent thing.
Yeah. So yeah, and also it's really interesting how I just kind of thought about this and put it into perspective, which is the 4, 5, 6 proper do not show up until 2 hours into this 5-hour series.
Damn.
Like they really delay that. And like the usage of the 4, 5, 6 ambassador in this is spectacular because like you never see it and it doesn't even show up until like a third of the way in.
Yep.
And it's fucking terrifying.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is like one of the most terrifying things that they've ever done. And like I watched the Torchwood declassified thing on the DVD for this. It's literally just basically an animatronic puppet that they fogged up that just enough and they got the right person to voice it. And because of that, it is fucking terrifying when it could have been like comical.
So
Yeah.
There's like no CG in the 456 at all.
yeah.
I'm just thinking about like
Maybe
know,
maybe the computer like fogged it up a little bit more, I think, because I noticed some of the behind the scenes shots, like the tank was not nearly as fogged, but like otherwise it's basically all practical.
yeah, and
Like the hunks of vomit that it like spews at the glass, that was practical.
yeah,
They
no, I
literally had
figured.
like tubes in the
Goody.
fucking thing.
And it's just it really it carries that extremely flat tone and gives
Yeah.
so much information with that, just the pauses and what
Yeah.
it responds to and what it doesn't respond to. And it's amazing, like the amount that
There
it's
is
giving
never a
char-
scene where it is talking to someone and it's not in control of the situation.
Absolutely. There
Nope.
is never a point where it feels like there's a real negotiation. It feels like it's a demand at every moment.
Yeah.
And at a certain point you even get the sense that it's enjoying it,
Yeah.
Mhm.
that it's enjoying having the power. Like there's
Yeah.
I'd say like there's a point in probably by the beginning of episode 5 where you're just like, yeah, this thing is absolutely reveling in having some weaker species to fuck around.
Yeah. And like I don't know, like it feels there it also feels like I don't know. I sort of read an implicit commentary on I mean like this might just be like me going into over analysis mode again, but maybe like the sort of implicit commentary on the fact of like this is a like far more technologically advanced being that could easily wipe the planet out if it wanted to, just basically here for something as banal as drugs.
Yeah.
And also that being the revelation is also like I struggle
Really
like
fucked.
that's got to be something hard because it cannot be anything they need for survival because then it would be like very hard, but someone could like make the argument of like, oh well they need it to survive, like it's not like it would cast them in at least a slightly sympathetic light. Like it's hard to come up with something that's just so it's not like over the top evil. Like it's not because it's fun. It is, but it's still like banal enough of just like we just want to get high, bro.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it hits that sweet spot really well of like it's not just sadism, it's this just fucked up practicality of like, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
we need drugs. Like, yeah, it's drugs. Who doesn't like
Yeah.
drugs?
It's like
And
Yeah.
and
we
just,
want this and we will take it.
Yeah.
and I don't know if this is the direction you were going with that, but it very much comes across as a colonialism thing.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, because you know you have like the breaking when you have all of the force on your side, they just break treaties as they wish, and there's not really too much room to negotiate. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's a very reductive view
Yeah.
to see colonialism. It's definitely a lot more complicated than that, obviously, but I think that's sort of the vibe it was kind of going for, of just totally fucking up an area for, cash crops or cash crops. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. It's cash crops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or like because you have the oil that makes our cars run. Yeah.
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 The vibe it
The
gave me
vibe
was
it gave me was
the
like
opium trade or something.
the opium trade or something.
Yeah, exactly. Bleh. So I guess like obviously there's a lot of plot to go in here, so I don't think we're gonna like go into like everything.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
so for example, let's skip ahead to the end of episode 4, where it's this big sort of like leading up to like, oh, like it's like the penultimate episode, and then maybe the 5th episode will be all about the fight back, and then it's just like, nope, like it fails miserably.
Yeah,
Like,
and that's I sort of commented that I reached a point where I was like, I'm halfway through the 5th episode, and there is no real effort to fight back yet, and I seriously started to believe that the show
yeah.
might just
Yeah,
have
that's
humanity
powerful.
lose.
Yeah, that is powerful. That's a very powerful thing to like in writing, of like normally like it's not like, it's almost like of course the humans are going to win. Like, what do you think? But it like the fact that like he's able to ride that line enough that you genuinely don't know.
And it's a
Until,
Pyrrhic
like,
victory.
Until the very, like, literally the last 10 minutes. And even then, it continues the ramping up of how, like, overwhelming it is, literally up past that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is a Pyrrhic victory. They, Jack and Gwen and everybody, and even the government, if you give a fuck about them, like, everybody comes out of this worse.
Yeah.
Even by, like the methods of, like, yeah, which is, it, props to creating a scenario where that doesn't feel, contrived. Again, I kind of have some problems with, like, character-wise, where that leaves Jack and certain other people, but it's, like, narratively, it's really solid in keeping those stakes high without doing it artificially, if that makes sense.
And also, more importantly, the end of episode 4 ends with the thing that pissed a lot of people off. Like, I don't even really fully know the extent myself, because of course I am watching this a decade after the fact, but not only have I read online, I have heard from my parents, who would have been watching this concurrently, that this was a big deal and people were pissed about this.
This isn't the most egregious barrier gaze.
Yeah, no, well,
ever.
yeah, that's the thing of, like, people say that it is a case of, like, bury your gaze, but I think that's fucking stupid, especially considering that it's, like, it was literally RTD's idea.
Yeah.
And, like, it's not, well, okay, let me put it this way, in the Torchwood thing, it's not bury your gaze if, like, the entire main cast is bisexual.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not you're killing off specifically the gay one.
Yeah, that gets into a whole. There are books you could write about, like, barrier gaze and everything, but, like, considering, not to get into supernatural discourse, because that's another whole fucking podcast.
Yeah, I've never watched Supernatural, but that seems like an example of barrier gaze.
No, yeah, exactly.
What are barrier gaze?
It's a trope where it's like the gay person is the one who dies. That's it.
Yeah, or like
And
after
it's
declaration of like gay love, especially.
Yeah. And it's like, it is an understandable trope, but in this case, especially considering who the writer is and considering how much of what the show was about, that's not bury your gays. That's a normal fucking character death.
Yeah,
Like,
I get that.
It would have played out exactly the same if, let's say, like, weird Bizarro universe where Jack is female and Ianto is male, so we avoid the fridging thing there too. Like, it would have played out the same, and I don't think people would have gotten like pissed about that. And it's, again, I don't think that's what this is.
Yeah, it's just it's a whole complicated thing, because even if it's like quote unquote done well and done with like good narrative like build up and character like fulfillment, it's still like, because of the overwhelming volume of gay characters killed off in general, it still feels weird and not great.
Yeah.
But it definitely wasn't a death where I was just like, well, this is contrived. I was just like, wow, this like this fucking hits home. Because
and it needed to happen. Like, it would have very much fucked with the vibe and the tone that it was going for if all of Torchwood made it out unscathed.
We'll get there, but all I'll say is that I think in Ianto dying and what Jack has to decide to do with his grandson both drive home ultimately where he ends up at the end. But I think,
and I
honestly think the grandson
like
would have been enough.
It is a perfect storm of like well, I mean, I think he would have made that decision anyway, but like the speed in which he comes to that decision is definitely like, you can feel the sense of like, there is like the fact that like Ianto's dead, and like, even for Jack, who has had meaningful relationships before, Ianto was someone special. And that's kind of like the breaking point.
Yeah. And obviously,
especially considering that he doesn't even fight back after Ianto dies until Johnson literally brings him in and is like, fix this shit.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an argument for where he goes. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. I'm saying I could see him breaking from just the decision of his grandkid alone. It's just like, again, for a TV event thing like this was kind of like constructed as, it makes sense to like quote unquote tie up as much as you can. It's just kind of like a weird trajectory, in my opinion, to go from like, oh, these are broken people, but they're like slowly getting better, to like, nah, everything's just like fucking like wrecked, and have that end. Especially when it is followed up by Miracle Day, which fucks things up even more and is also not canon. So it's just again,
this show, let it be known that the Hooniverse has no canon, but that being said, Miracle Day is still not canon.
It's extra not canon. It's diet not canon. But yeah, as I kind of said earlier on, I think most of my like things that like detract from like my overall enjoyment have to do with the fact that this is tied to Doctor Who and tied to Torchwood. If this was like a, I don't know, just like random like Netflix original like one-off thing, I would think this is great. But it's just like how it is a part of everything else, and how they kind of fail to do any follow-up, which I guess you could argue is part of the point, that there isn't any follow-up, except there is. It's just a weird thing where it's just
clearly,
like,
I don't think like Miracle Day happened, but I don't think RTD necessarily had Miracle Day in mind when he did. Like, clearly there was a sense of like, he left it open enough to be like, hey, if people want to do this again, then we can do this. And like, he didn't like completely write it off, but it was clear that this was supposed to be, if it needed to end here, it could, and I think it should. Miracle Day was kind of an act. It was kind of like he tried to kill the show, but him killing the show got like extremely high ratings and like the best reviews of any Torchwood thing ever. So Starz was like, "Yo, can we have that?" And the BBC was like, "Fuck it, sure."
Oh,
so
Starz
RTD
did that?
fucking yeah. So fucking RTD like moved to like California with Julie Gardner and did like Miracle Day, although he only did like the first episode of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, like, as I said, like construction wise, this is like as close to flawless as Torchwood gets. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, real
I
life
think
gets
it's
in
the
the way.
I think it is the most tightly paced and best written thing he's ever done.
Yeah, and it's the most consistent Torchwood is, despite my qualms with it, like thematically and how it ties into the rest of the show. Like this is the Doctor Who series 4 of Torchwood, except like even better than that, arguably.
Yeah, definitely. And another like side note, when I talk about ratings, literally, it is like in terms of like ratings, and it is the like episode 4 is the highest amount of viewers that Torchwood ever got, and it was like it's like tied with Stolen Earth Journey's End for audience like interest, audience appreciation index. Like they're weird, like not they have their own thing. It's not like a Nielsen rating, but like that sort of thing to like determine like interest and how many people were watching without actually going to like literal hard data. So like it was damn popular, and it literally was event television. Like reading like reviews, apparently it was like people who never even watched Torchwood anymore were watching it and were like engrossed in like the Jack and Ianto subplot and like all of that. So like this was big, like far bigger than I think the BBC had expected.
Yeah. And it deserves it because
yeah.
fuck. I mean, I think that's something, you know, I'm not sure if we've said it like explicitly, yes, but this thing fucks. This thing fucks hard. Like, this shit is so good. I genuinely can't remember the time I watched something that put me through this much emotional duress. Like, I keep trying to think. There are things I've watched that are sad. That make me cry a lot, and this didn't make me cry that much. But like,
mainly because
it's not
also
sadness.
like the only like really there aren't like places like to cry except in like end of episode 4 and end of episode 5. But it is it's very oppressive emotionally.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a crying type of emotional intensity. It's just like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Where each episode leaves you feeling like you've just been through a lot.
Yeah.
And it pulls off the impressive thing of like, despite so much dark shit happening over the course of this 5-episode event, at no point did I feel like it crossed a line where I was like uncomfortable or like just felt like it did something or like touched on something that like fiction shouldn't do, despite like the darkness and
like
the seriousness.
God, they literally like gorily kill a kid off on TV, and even that doesn't feel like it's gone too well. I mean, it's supposed to be a point where narratively it's the breaking point.
Yeah,
but it is not something that feels gratuitous. It is not something that feels egregious, and it doesn't feel like writing wise it was a step too far. It is painful because it genuinely kind of is the only way that they could get out of that situation.
Yeah, God, can you imagine if this was like condensed into a 2-parter in series 1 Torchwood, how fucking awful this would be.
Oh yeah, no. There's I don't even think like RTD's not stupid. He wouldn't even try it.
No, yeah, just yeah, it takes its time. We're covering old ground at this point, but yeah, it's effective with its time, and it knows how to. It's found the Torchwood balance of being mature and using its rating and its what it's able to do, and not be juvenile with it. Like
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is the result of them like fucking up and learning all the way
Yeah.
through. RTD specifically, anyways.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not even sure how much of it. Well, I mean, like obviously, like I think there was a sense of like they did learn, but like again, I don't actually think Torchwood proper like obviously RTD created it, but I don't actually know if he really had as much input into series 1 and 2 as we like maybe think that he did, because obviously he had his hands full with Doctor Who. By 2008 he was setting up Sarah Jane Adventures. I think Chibnall was kind of more of a um primary like showrunner, and RTD would just kind of be like, yeah, okay, that sounds good, or like, yeah, like I don't think RTD was nearly as hands-on, because it is noticeable that like the one time that RTD went full hands-on and wasn't getting like fucked around by like American television expectations, like the one time that that happened, it was easily the best.
Yeah. Um. I'm I lost my train of thought, but
Yeah.
uh, God, what the fuck was I gonna say? It's very good. I think it very much comes across. It's very heavy for sure.
Yeah.
It's very
And
heavy,
it's
and it
not
deals.
something that like I will probably rewatch it in like a couple years time with someone, but I don't think I'm going to. It's not something you rewatch for fun.
Oh, for sure. Like, this isn't something you're like, hey, wanna like watch something? And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
let's put on Children of Earth. We're gonna have a great time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is something you watch to appreciate the artistry of it, for sure. Just
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much pain you can put shit through with writing.
Yeah.
Cause like that's the
And
thing,
still make it compelling, because like darkness induced audience apathy is a trope for a reason.
yeah,
You have to be very careful.
like there's definitely that line you have to walk. I'm thinking about like probably what I'm thinking of is like a trauma porn edge bait anime where it's just like
Which is like, from what I understand, like my mom already doesn't particularly well. I'm not entirely sure how my mom feels about Children of Earth, but it's clear that it like it doesn't quite hit the same for her, and she thinks that like it's clear that like it's very much like a tipping point, which I also agree that it's kind of like a tipping point of like you can't go any farther from that. From what I can understand, Miracle Day is literally that.
yeah.
It is the step too far.
Yeah, so it sort of reminded me of that, like sort of the anime that try to be Mirai Nikki but don't understand what Mirai Nikki did right, and they're just like, let's just make our main character just a ball of fucking pain, and just everything bad happens to them all the time, and
Yeah.
I think what makes it work in 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 this is just like it balances it, like it has these like this overriding sense of darkness, but there are moments where there's like hope and shit, and there's moments of people getting along, there's moments of things going right, and it's not just an endless barrage of just everything going wrong. It has this sort of balance where it hits these major dark notes, but it has these sort of moments of hope and like cooperation in the middle that sort of balances it out.
Yeah. And in even then, like obviously like I for and there's still like that moment of like RTD is great at writing characters, and RTD is also great at, I guess the best way to call it is like the human element.
Mm-hmm.
He
For
is
sure.
great at relatability and making you still like, I'm going to use Frobisher as an example of like a lesser writer I don't think would be able to pull off making him as sympathetic a character as he ultimately is, especially in the end. But RTD does.
Absolutely.
Like, I can totally imagine if this was written by someone else, the end where Frobisher kills himself and his family could have been just like more like, oh, I feel bad for the family, but I don't feel bad for Frobisher. Whereas in here, it's gut-wrenching, and I especially like highlight the one that sticks in my brain is the pause between the third and fourth gunshot, which is like 4 or 5 seconds, but feels like an eternity.
Yeah. But brilliant pacing for that scene.
Yeah.
And build up and everything. It's the gush fest. It really is, but it's
Yeah.
well earned.
Yeah.
So much of this is well crafted, and I must say,
and also like it being intercut with his assistant person, like Bridget visiting Lois in prison and saying that John Frobisher was a good man, and even though all of the shit that he's done, you believe her when she says it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
And
just
it's very hard to make a sort of career civil service, like politician, well, not a politician, but like civil service person. It's hard to do that, especially for me.
yeah, like that's the thing. Like we're all, personally, I'm obviously gonna stick to the part that everyone in the government is a piece. Actually, no, just everyone in this is a piece of shit. Um, that's the line I'd stick to. But even then, she had me she had me during that speech. It's just
Yeah.
such a compelling moment. It's such a compelling speech and moment that I'm just like, yeah, I can buy into this for the sake of this story
Yeah.
because she just sells it so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The interesting thing too that I read, which is another thing of like, it's part hindsight and part, I guess, like who the people are of, like, there's this one site that I read who's usually like a lot more critical on this sort of stuff than I was, and I was reading through their reviews, basically all of which were like, all of their like New Who and Torchwood stuff was contemporary to the time that it came out, so alongside these episodes airing. And I find it fascinating that they thought that the cabinet scenes were like too over the top of like, no, the part that's scary about the cabinet sequence scenes is that them dehumanizing and trying to figure out a way to best divvy up 10% of Britain's children and give them up is perfectly believable. I could believe that people in power would do this.
Yeah.
And
it's
one of the things that really fucks with me on it, like what really sold it to me is that they pretended, or like they collectively pretended to consider the random selection for a moment,
Yeah.
and then at a certain point they're just like, come on guys, let's drop this shit. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that speech of like,
And
we've already
also
accepted that there are some people who are more important than others by like protecting our own families. So if we're doing that, then let's take it all the way.
might as well go all the way off the cliff. Yeah.
And it makes sense. Like you can't,
Yeah.
if you're accepting that logic at all, then you have to go all the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's and also the sort of the thing at the end when Brian Greene is deposed, and how clever it feels, like the clever, I feel like it's super clever how the person who helps Bridget depose this person is the person who first suggests taking the people who were like scoring the worst in schools.
Exactly.
Because it's like, it's the sense of like, it doesn't matter who is in power. They all would have done the same. Maybe they'd have been a little bit less devoted to the spin, but they'd have all done it anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sort of thinking about this analysis I watched of um Doctor Strangelove about how war is portrayed in that movie, and about how you have
It's been a
the
hot minute, but yeah, I remember that being a like black comedy.
yeah, and it's
It's
sort of
been a couple years.
it's sort of a similar thing about like your Earth is faced with a disaster scenario. What next? Except it's obviously it is played in a more comedic, lighthearted tone. And it's very much not as serious. But it's just sort of what I'm thinking of is sort of this analysis I watched, and it sort of goes into this idea of you have the inside people and you have the outside people, and you have the inside people who are all in a room and they're the ones deciding what everyone else does, and they're all on the same team. And then you have the
Yeah.
outside people who are having to deal with everything else. Um, and that's sort of it's the exact same vibe here, where everyone in that cabinet room at the end of the day is playing for the same team, and you
Yeah.
could swap it out any which way, and everyone
Like
who's in that room will still be playing for the same team.
Yeah. Like obviously there are people who are more or less like devoted to the spin. Like obviously like Brian Green was pretty devoted to the spin, but like let's say not as like psychotically much as the character that Rick Yates Rick Yates, who is Nick Briggs's character, who is just literally a spin doctor, but it's like you all would have made that choice in the end. It doesn't matter who becomes the prime minister next. The only prime minister in the series who would have done anything different about this is long gone.
Yeah. It's,
And it's
really
it's
good.
also like it's interesting now because the same sort of idea of like you all would have done it still applies if you look at it from a modern context. But the interesting thing, and this is the same thing of Spin, of Stu Bagfull did a video on rewatching The Thick of It, which is of course a black comedy where it like the British government is depicted as it very much sort of was in the Blairite sort of Gordon Brown like mid 2000s sort of period of devoted to the spin, and you always have to be on top of how outdated this is, because at this point the British government doesn't give a shit anymore. Like people have been fired and have come back into the Boris Johnson administration like countless times for doing bad shit, and nobody cares.
Yeah, we very much live in a post-spin era.
So it's like and it's interesting how the same sentiment of you would have done it would have still applied. Like it's the very much sort of thing of like at the end of the day, no one in the government is going to face any real like like individual people may, but the government as a whole isn't going to face anything from this. And it's weird how that vibe still carries through even if spin itself as a concept is basically outdated.
You could absolutely extrapolate this to see a shift from 2000s British politics to 2010s British politics, or just politics in general, really, in the West, from the guy who does the bad shit but tries to spin it to the woman who does the bad shit and just doesn't bother spinning it, like yeah,
Yeah.
it's just
Or
you
like
can,
for example, like I maybe yeah, or like yeah, I don't even think they necessarily set Frobisher up to be the fall guy. Even they just wouldn't bother, because who the fuck, well, I mean, maybe they still would, because like there's sort of like levels, and like obviously like the Thick of It never had to deal with a spin this fucking big, but like yeah.
Yeah. I echo pretty much all of what y'all just said. It's you can tell a work of art and like truly great writing when even if the modern or like the contemporary like political writing is like somewhat like, yeah, it's dated, but it still applies today. Like that's some good shit. That's from someone who knows, like, behind the aesthetics, like what's going on and the nature of people and of certain systems.
Yeah. And yeah.
Sort of
So
the thing I wanted
go
to
ahead
throw
and
out-
say, because I was gonna change the subject, so like go ahead.
I was gonna kind of change the subject too. I just one thing I was thinking about when I was watching this is like, sort of I could make a very easy anarchist critique of all of this, because like when I'm thinking about sort of how all of this happens, we're like, yeah, anyone who's going to be in that position of power would probably do the same thing, because sure, it is probably the preferable choice if you're given those options, and it's horrible, but that if you're working within that logic, then yes, that's the best choice. And so sort of, my thing would be, okay, so let's get rid of those those positions of power, because if you don't have a government to talk to, then there's no way you could ever organize taking that much of the human population. And I know that's a very silly argument, like, yeah, we should do anarchy because then we can avoid alien invasions taking over our governments. But like, a similar logic applies to a lot of things. That's just sort of what was sort of on my mind when I was watching it. Like, yeah, you could swap out, any person, no matter how progressive, if you put them in this position, they will have to make an unsightly choice.
Unless they are crazy enough or prepared enough to actually try fighting them off.
Yeah, but that's also an equally horrible choice to make. To put all of humanity into war that they're probably going to lose. And so sort of I would say, just don't have those positions, because then there's nothing to contact to be able to like control large bodies of population, which is something that sort of happened in real colonization. Sometimes they came across peoples that just didn't have a leader to talk to. And then how the fuck do you deal with that? And they would sort of like try to force them to have a leader so that they could talk to that person. And
I have to say, I find like it's very interesting, sort of, I guess, like obviously the 4, 5, 6 are extremely sort of enigmatic, but like the fact that they kill the 4, 5, 6 ambassador, basically, or I'm assuming kill, because that was quite a lot of blood and it looked like it exploded against the tank, but they just leave. It's interesting how like self-assured in their like idea of like, we can like put these people down, that as soon as they actually get a hit in, they're just like, okay, fuck it, we're going somewhere else, bye. And like, I feel like someone could call that lazy writing, but I actually think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, why
and it also
go for
opens
someone
interpretations of like, maybe it was just someone conning them. It wasn't even the rest of the species. It was just one person.
Yeah.
And who like knew that they didn't have, like, the human race didn't have any way to call them on their bullshit. And that's another thing of like, if the doctor was there, the doctor would totally be able to intuit it and it would be an anticlimax. But one of the fear things here, and one of the most interesting things, is that it is left completely ambiguous.
Oh, I would actually say on that note, like my personal theory is that this 456 was actually not the same ones from 1965. Like, my guess is he, like, this 456 just sort of heard from them, like, oh yeah, there's like this planet where you can just like show up and basically, they're weak as shit, just be intimidating, and they'll just hand him the right over. And this guy's like probably some broke ass alien, and they're like, ah shit, like I could totally just like take this for as much as it's worth. Like, fuck it, let's just tell him to give me as many kids as I can get. Like, what the fuck are they gonna do about it? Like, I mean, that's my personal theory, that it isn't actually the same alien, and it's just some alien that heard from other 456 that you can just do this. And then obviously that bond didn't apply to them, and so they were like, fuck it, let's just go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of the track that I was going to go to is, so what do you guys think about like that ending resolution where they like, because I've seen, like, I watched Council of Geeks' video, and they actually didn't think that was done as well as it could have been, whereas I don't know, I do agree with the thing of like Steven probably could have deserved to have been more of a character, but that being said, like, I still think that's still incredibly effective.
I would agree.
And sort of like how you can see Jack initially like completely dismiss it out of hand, but then he actually thinks about it, and you can see that he's clearly made up his mind already.
Yeah, and again, like I think, again, even though Jack's family is perhaps not as fleshed out as like other characters are in this whole
Yeah.
arc, it still works because it's more time, frankly, than I think this would get in like a regular
Yeah.
series arc.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely.
And again, like putting this outside the context of like what Jack's arc has kind of been throughout the last two seasons of Torchwood, like, yeah, it makes sense that like if your goal is to break Jack, then
Yeah.
this is kind of what you need to do if you have these pieces on the board to like execute that. And I guess like
Yeah.
I guess you're like the success that has and like affecting you is probably just going to come down to how you feel about the kid and what little acting he gets to do and the family, which, you know, valid.
And how I do think something that definitely is sold is how much like the kid clearly doesn't really understand what's going on because he's a fucking like 7-year-old kid. And he trusts Jack because why would he not trust Jack?
Yeah.
And also just, even though like it lets up a bit at the end, this still like pitch black ending of it literally ends. And Torchwood, I think the idea of like if Torchwood is going to end, this is how it ends, is Gwen going, "You can't just leave," and Jack just saying, "Watch me," and leaving.
Yeah. And it's just such a moment for Jack because he spent literally the last century doing this.
And he spent so much time into taking, like, you see it in fragments, how much he was disgusted by Torchwood as this force of imperialism, and spent so much time trying to make it into something that the Doctor would be, I don't know, proud of, but approve of more.
Yeah.
And this is what he got for it.
The 21st century is when everything changes, and they were not ready.
Yeah.
Has to be said. But really, yeah, it makes sense, barring my own personal issues with how it fits with the rest of the series, like tonally and thematically. Like, yeah, this is a good end. And I will nominate that if we ever talk about Miracle Day, Miracle Day, fuck. If we ever talk about that, I at least will be drunk to add to the whole affair.
Yeah, let's get into that real quick. I forgot to post this on Twitter earlier, but we are recording this on Saturday the 12th of December, and I will probably be posting this on Twitter before the episode comes out. But our Patreon now has stretch goals. If we get 10 people pledging money to us, I will consider that enough people getting paid enough that we will watch we will watch and discuss Miracle Day. So if you want us to talk about Miracle Day, pay the fuck up.
Yeah, if you want to hear Drunk Sky, that's how you're getting it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like, yeah, I guess that's sort of really. We've been going for about an hour and a half now, and I guess that's really sort of about everything that I think I can really say on Children of Earth. So I guess sort of moving on to ratings. I don't listen to the last hour and a half of the podcast. 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, triple S tier. I can't say Raw Kino Goat Swag Poggers because it's like super depressing, but like it's easily one of the best written things in all of the Hooniverse, and like I think RTD's crowning moment as a Doctor Who writer, even if it's not technically Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this thing is like so close to being absolutely perfect for me. Just as an arc, as a narrative, as an endeavor in television filmmaking, I can't help but admire the craft at absolutely every single level. I can't think of
like normally I don't like overly dark and depressing things.
Yep.
Like, especially recently. Like,
Yeah.
I have spent so much of my, like, life this year playing a game that, while it has its sad and depressing moments, still, I think, has an overall, like, optimistic tone. And that sort of thing, and has been something I've done with friends. And, like, for example, like, super, like, grim, dark, edgy things like The Last of Us 2, like, I have no interest in playing. That's not sort of a thing for me. I still like this. I thought this was really, really fantastic, and I think the ability to write something like that is so dark and so depressing without, like, turning off people in your audience, and I imagine people are still turned off by this, and I wouldn't really fault them for that. But the fact that this was able to still grip me personally is really a sign of just how good a writer, and possibly one of the best writers of the universe has ever had, RTD is.
100%. Yeah, I'm not really a person for like downer.
Obviously, like, we're probably going, and side note, we're probably going to be dunking on Moffat a lot in the new year, but Moffat is on that list too. He is still a very good writer. He just has his problems.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, everything... It is quite impressive, as Jeff said, to, like, create a work that, like, just nosedives, not in terms of quality, but in terms of, like, tone and, like, yeah, just tone and everything and how it ends, and still, like, manage to make me feel, like, not good, but, like, fulfilled, and, like, I watched something, like, worth my time.
Yeah.
Just, like, that's so rare for, like, a dark work.
It didn't feel like a cop-out, and it didn't feel like the ending... Like, yeah, the ending came quickly, and, like, was in, like, basically the last, like, 15 minutes of the thing, yes, but it still feels like it wasn't bad despite that.
Yeah, I can't possibly...
That's a hard tightrope to walk.
It is a very...
Definitely.
Like, I was genuinely astounded by how well they pulled off that sort of narrow turnaround.
Yeah.
And especially because, like I actually... How often is it that a finale episode written by RTD is the best one out of a collection of episodes? Like,
True.
Not even The Parting of the Ways, which is probably the best of his finales and the only one that I would call, like, genuinely 100% amazing. Even Parting of the Ways isn't as good as this. Like, that is
Definitely
like,
not.
even, like, RTD was literally not able to do this a lot of the time.
Yeah,
It's
so
insane.
yeah, it's impossible to sum up like collective the amount of stuff that just like knocks it out of the park. Again, it's amazing, and the fact that I still enjoy it as much as I do, despite my problems with like how how it follows up with the previous seasons of Torchwood, and how like Jack's character has been continued, despite the fact that those things knocked it down for me. It's still low S tier, low S tier, like hot damn.
Yeah.
Eat your heart out, Chibnall.
Man, it's wild when Skylar is the I mean, admittedly, critical here doesn't mean much, but still like the most critical of the thing that we watched.
Yeah.
Because normally it's Celeste or me.
Yeah. I hate it. 10 out of 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I tend to be the wild
Ruined
card.
my life. 10 out of 10.
Everything about this is a mess, but I kind of like it. So 8 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's gonna be me. That's gonna be me next week. Like I have already watched End of Time. That's going to be me next week. That episode, like the first episode of End of Time, is fucking awful, but I love it.
Yeah, I mean that's been us with some of the episodes, but I mean this one is just a very obvious 10 out of 10. It's so good. It's a banger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's weird because unlike our other 10 out of 10s, it's not necessarily a like, yo, go out and watch this shit. Like, even like, I'm trying to think like what else, like an obvious, like everyone agreed 10 out of, oh, Random Shoes. Random Shoes is a Torchwood episode, but it's still something that's like, it's not this dark and you can still totally be like, yo, hey, you should totally watch this. Whereas like this is like, this is really good, but I wouldn't blame you if you don't want to watch this.
Yeah. For
Yeah,
sure.
This is not a Christmas time flick. Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, one last thing I totally forgot to mention. The part where I'm just thinking about how based of RTD it is that the part where PC Andy basically like finally realizes like what is going on, and he like you see him look at like the unemployed dad squad like for a long time, and you can see him wrestling, but the fact that not only does he join in, he takes off his police vest and radio and cap and tie.
That moment was so good.
Yeah. That is like possibly the most based RTD moment I have ever seen. Like, you can see him just be like, no, fuck this. And like, he still gets his ass beat, but like, man.
Ass beat for the right reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, next week we will obviously, as I mentioned, be discussing the 2009 2009 Christmas special and 2009 New Year's special, The End of Time, parts 1 and 2. Until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can support us on Patreon for a number of benefits, including the ability to listen into episodes live, access to episodes early, and potentially even the ability to guest star on an episode of your choosing. Also, a number of new Patreon stretch goals, which include such fun stuff as me buying and live streaming the Doctor Who VR game, us watching fucking Dimensions in Time, Miracle Day, and if we somehow get 20 people to give us money, we will watch Class. We will
Pod
fucking
jam.
do it.
And it will be boring.
Yeah.
And I will also be drunk.
Yeah. I'm Jeff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL and on Twitch at WheatleyDLT.
I'm sad and gay. You can find me on Twitter at skyhigh9_5, being on brand as always.
And I'm that one amorphous blob of people. Follow me at the
Nihilist Panther.
Nihilist Panther. I remember
This
my
is
Twitter
the
at.
third week in a row where I have known what your Twitter at is, and you haven't. And the worst part is it has been exactly the same for the past 3 weeks.
In my defense, I am partially someone whose memory cuts off at like June.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, back when you were Big Fat Penis 69, yeah.
it's your boy, Big Fat Penis 69, coming right back at you. Oh man, yeah.
Revenge of the Meme.
Revenge of the Meme. Yeah. And we will see you all next week.